DEI in its iteration of what we've all known it to be, maybe it had its day because it's being challenged. It's being reworked. It's being politicized at the moment. Yeah. Even it's so interesting to me, just the wording alone of when you say diversity, equity, inclusion, the reaction that people get and where their mind associates that to is so negative, where what we're really talking about is, are people being represented? The meaning and the heart of it had its day.
Welcome to Leadership Rewired. Allison Allen and Dean Martin invite you to join them for an honest conversation that brings a personal perspective to the issues of leadership.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Leadership Rewired podcast. I'm Dean Martin. Joined with me is my co-host, Allison Allen. Today, what we're talking about is leading with digital inclusion in a post-DE&I world. And how this kind of came about is, Allison and I have been chatting. We do a lot of chatting always, not even on the podcast. We just generally chat. And one of the things we've been, sort of discussing is what's happening to DE&I. Noticing how organizations are re-evaluating or assessing whether those functions and those departments still exist, how much budget do they have for it, what's happening to DE&I. And we really want to think about how can leaders be inclusive, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's a business imperative. But added to that, what's different about this isn't just the DE&I and inclusion chat. It's really how can we look at it through the lens of technology enablement. What is the role there? How can leaders at all levels champion inclusion through the kind of technology choices they make? And so the best person we could possibly think of, there you are, Giselle Mota. I met Giselle quite a while ago when we were working together in the same organization. So I'm lucky to call you a friend, but you're really here today because you have deep experience in this space. So as an inclusion strategist and as the founder of an organization called Versd, VERSD.io. You can find out more about Giselle on her website. But really, we know you've got deep experience in this. So we welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us here, Giselle.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
The one thing, before I'm going to ask you to give a little intro for yourself, you probably wouldn't say this, so I get to say the nice thing. In addition to much of your experience and expertise, you were named a top 100 future of work thought leader. So really the perfect person for us to be discussing this issue today about, leading with digital inclusion. So Giselle, tell us, what do you think is important for people to know just at the top of this podcast, and then we'll get deep into this chat in a bit.
The important thing to know is that Dean didn't tell you that we also have had some dance party situations where
I love that.
True.
Oh, no, I think the important thing to know is that, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're really just talking about considering people. And I would love to center the conversation and always kind of go back to that as we get into some of the specifics and maybe even some technical conversations. I want us to always remember that what we're really talking about is people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you. So let's start with a question of, do you think has DE&I had its day?
It depends who you ask. So
okay.
If you ask certain people of DE&I in its iteration of what we've all known it to be, maybe it had its day. Maybe that whole rhetoric, or I would say the approach of looking at DE&I as filling in slots with people that are looking different, or are you looking at race and ethnicity only as a component, or those kind of things. Yes, that had its day, I believe, because it's being challenged. It's being reworked. It's being politicized at the moment. Yeah, absolutely. So even it's so interesting to me, just the wording alone of when you say diversity, equity, inclusion, when you say DEI and whatever versions of all these words and letters put together, the reaction that people get and where their mind associates that to is so negative, where what we're really talking about, again, is, are people being represented? Are people being considered? Do they have access to some of the same opportunities? It's that. And so at the basis, the meaning and the heart of it hasn't had its day. And I'll talk about that through the lens of technology in a second, but the approach has definitely had its day.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm actually okay with this not all being a tech conversation. I couldn't agree with you more, Giselle, around that this is, at the heart of anything that we are creating around inclusive spaces is you're centering that around people. And I think where this becomes a business conversation is when you're talking about, is that people inside your organization or people which you are selling products and services to, right? So either way, you are thinking about inclusion around that aspect. So I love that.
Yeah.
So when you think about the sort of the impacts of these cuts on leaders and organizations, right? And they're having to think about their teams and they're having to think about the products that they produce. What do you think the biggest benefit is to them to keep DEI at the center, or even just inclusion at the center of the work that they're doing?
You started to mention it. Yeah, you started to mention it, Allison. And I think it's because when we think about people, we're thinking about, hold on, I want to be able to, in order to be in business, I need to be able to, first of all, have two factors, which is the people who are working on ensuring that the day-to-day happens. And we want the best skills. We want the best talent. We're looking for people to want to stay with our organizations and even want to join our organizations. Yeah. If you don't make space for people to become, to feel a sense of like, I belong here or I'm valued here. I feel like this place is not stressing me out. It's not making me have to speak in a way that I don't speak because I'm having to try to now reach some ideal that has been set for me. And, I'm pulling my little quotation marks in my fingers here. Right. But like, I have to dress a certain way. I have to show up a certain way. I have to placate, or even I have to navigate a space that doesn't bend towards me at all in receiving the fullness of who I am. Yeah. Nobody wants to be a part of somewhere where they feel uncomfortable. And that's why you're seeing this trend of a lot of people, especially Black women, have been leaving the workforce and the workplace and organizations in large numbers. And you hear, and by the way, if some listeners didn't know this, like, please know that many people are leaving organizations because they just are fed up. They feel that they can't be themselves. They feel that they're overworked, overlooked. There's a lot of that happening. And so you see a lot of people, or especially people of color, have left and they're starting their own things. I know people who have been in amazing corporate roles, have been at the top of their careers. And you know that they've left all of that behind because they want to go work at something that we'd say, wait, you went to school and now you're working on that job? Like this is how much you were making and you let that go, because they're seeking peace. They're seeking peace of mind, and they're trying to relinquish like their soul that they felt has been left because for a long time they had to conform to something that's not in alignment with them. And then, so that's on the employee side. And we want that skill. We want talent. We want good people. But are we making an environment to have them? That's number one. Right. On the other side, businesses want people to come buy their product and, subscribe to their service. And if you are not making products or services that keep those people in mind, or that are tailored to them and their needs and how they show up as a consumer, then you are missing out. And they will go to the next vendor, the next business who does make room for them to also feel a sense of, I belong here. This is a brand that I can associate with, and et cetera. Yeah.
When you're talking about, organizations making decisions about which, or rather consumers making decisions around which kind of vendor they're going to use, or, what kind of service they're going to go with, and then making choices to move away from something if they don't feel themselves represented. I'm wondering from an organization's point of view, if we think about, creating these tools, for tech enablement, I think historically, the real decision point, or the way in which product teams or whatever have gone about making those choices have typically been associated with what are the digital tools that will drive our business goals. So it's usually about, boosting productivity, or streamlining a hiring process, or, increasing an efficiency or whatever. And that's typically been like the business goal. This is how we're going to make the decision. So therefore, we're going with this vendor for our infrastructure, and this vendor for our communication, and this vendor for our whatever, our cloud services or whatever. But I wonder to what extent inclusion is acknowledged as one of the business goals, rather than, well, we just made a real sort of logical decision. Of course, we're going to go with this method. Our CRM is going to be this.
Right. Interesting. That's a great question, because it doesn't come through as, is this inclusive? Right? It doesn't come through as that metric. It comes through as, do our employees feel a sense of employee engagement? Are they showing that? Is there usability in the tool? Right. And then imagine this for a moment. I like to give more concrete examples, but like if you have a tool that is supposed to be a survey response where you're asking like employees to give their responses and share their sentiments and all of that. If you don't create a space within that tool where you can ask people, like if you're asking them for their gender, did you include genders outside of the binary? Because what happens to those employees who do identify as something outside of that? You just left out a whole group of people. And as they are trying to participate in whatever tool, they don't see themselves able to identify along with everybody else. Or maybe it's the preferred name when it's a mobile app, or something that greets the person upon entering. And it says good morning or hello, whoever's name. And if the name is only the legal name, you probably just opened up yourself as well to a risk where now you are calling someone by a dead name, perhaps, or they're only their legal name. And so it could be the risk of your brand and your reputation in that experience, but also like some certain like discriminatory and compliance risks and things that can come up there. So even as simple as giving people a chance to put what their preferred name is inside of one of those product experiences. So again, it won't always be like a client will say, well, this is not inclusive, but they will say, the feedback that I'm getting from my employees is that this is not one that's creating the best experience, or, in that way that we can see from other labels or metrics that you would call it. Again, the usability is a big one. If you create something that only a few people can use, a lot of people won't be using it to its maximum potential. And you wasted your money on that, or you wasted your investment. You want to have the most usability of whatever tool or product that is, right? And the best reach as well.
Nice,
Right. Let me give you actually one more on this one. I often think about experiences, and I work a lot with AI, and I think about like all these opportunities now that you can like chat, generative AI and get answers. But if those answers are not nuanced enough to consider more human beings, then you're giving such a generalized answer that isn't really reflective of a real person's question. So if you ask some, chat, a generative AI chat situation, if you ask it, hey, I want to learn about like my leave opportunities or the benefits that are available at my company. But what if that's like one way you can get a generic answer about everything that's available in your catalog of benefits or something. But if you go further, you will notice that people will ask more particular questions. Hey, somebody could say in the app, hey, I need to find out about parental leave because I'm the birthing parent and my wife and I both work at this organization. And we would like to know what both of our options are so we both can take parental leave. That is more of a real human interaction. And if you didn't follow what I just said, there were many nuances in what I was just sharing. When we break down the logic, this couple is a couple who identifies as a gender identity that isn't just your typical traditional male and female. And then it seemed as well that the birthing parent may be the person who's carrying the baby, but not necessarily identify as a woman or a mother. And so, wow, you have all these other things that are coming up. Does the generative AI understand that, right? That nuance level is, so to break it down, what I'm saying here is when you're creating technology like this, you've got to think about real people. It should reflect real circumstances and real life things. And as much as you might want to get away from DEI or whatever variation of those letters, you still have real people that are behind the technology that you have to think about. And that's kind of how that all comes together.
Yeah. So if I was to summarize, I felt like Dean was asking, is there sort of these criteria for which you're choosing? So we identify we have a problem. Now let's choose a software. I love where you went, Giselle, in the sense that basically, if we bring that back to when you're choosing software internally or externally, you need to also include not just the problem you're trying to solve, but the nuance of the people who are using these products that we're going to create. So whatever that
you
answer
said that
is,
so much better than I did.
No. I just want to make sure I want to make sure I summarize it because it helps me, by quite frankly, if I do that. But it's like, I think that's a really powerful point, because I do think we as leaders often start with, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the business problem? When I'm working with teams, I'm like, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? Right. And then once you come up with that problem that we're trying to solve, we try to go at the solution, when in fact, what we should do is just take a moment to think about, okay, on the user side of this, who is that target audience? What is it about them that we need to consider in choosing this product? Do you think that there's a difference between choosing technology enablement solutions internally versus the ones that we would choose or think about building for external use for our clients? Do you think there's a difference?
I want to say no, because at the end of the day, you still have the same nuance, whether it's the executive or the manager or the practitioner who's working on the inside. It's funny because we often think that the people on the inside of our organizations are so different than those end users on the outside or our clients or their employees. It's like you still have, someone working on processing payroll who is a person who is blind and still wants to access the experience like everyone else. Or you have, someone who came from another country outside of the United States and they're living in the United States and they want to shorten their name so they have a preferred name that they go by. Or you still have people with different gender identities, sexual orientation, and they're working within the organization using the tools. So it goes both ways.
Yeah.
I think you're right on that. And I was just what popped in my mind is I was thinking about just the number of times you see someone roll out a product or a sweater, we won't have to say the name, that is just so offensive to a group of people. And you're like, surely between the concept, the design, the sewing of the sweater to putting it on a like a hanger or something in a store, somebody saw the sweater. It's like, what's happening here? So anyway, sorry, Dean, you were about to say something.
Yeah. No, well, that's true. I mean, we've all seen products or, a product name outside of business, let's say, but a product name or a name of a company, or even like you walk down the street and there's like the name of the hairdresser or whatever. And I can look at that and I go, no women were consulted in that.
Not one.
Or I'll buy something and I go, clearly nobody with a sprinkle of queerness or gayness was consulted, because that word means something kind of different. Or clearly nobody of color was ever consulted with. And you can kind of see how some products, in terms of like consumers, have been, somebody's missed the trick there. But if we can bring it back into the organization, I think one thing that this is leading us to is thinking about if perhaps you are a leader within a product team. So, group of people, those who are working together, you're responsible for the ideation right through to the prototype testing or the rollout, the launch of a product that you may be making. What are some additional things that you've seen product teams and leaders do well, Giselle, in terms, like the first thing, would be is it interdisciplinary? Is there some good representation so we can say, yeah, we've got some women and we ask people of color and, people who are not just Americans were consulted, does this language work? So some diversity in that product team. But are there some other things you've seen leaders do well?
Absolutely. And you touch on something important, and everyone always mentions that, and then they stay there and they don't go any further. They're like, make sure you have diversity in the room. That's what they want to share to start with. And I get it. Okay. But if you have the diversity in the room and you don't allow those voices to be heard, then what's the point? Right. So I think there's also there's a second part to that. It's like, no, we're not just counting heads here. We're listening to voices and perspectives, and they are weighing in to the design, and they are influencing the design and the prototyping of all of that. So that's one thing. Yeah. On even more practical levels is like, if you didn't have it, that representation in the room, do you seek it? So I would say to everyone, and whether you are a leader of a product experience or whether you're leading a sales team, a service team, like put in whatever your function is, marketing teams and communications, seek outside counsel of people who specialize in that. For example, if you have a commercial that you're putting out or a certain product or something, and you don't have people with disabilities internally to be able to weigh in and tell you, like, does the messaging hit? Is it off? Did you test it accordingly? Where's the feedback of those particular groups in the room? If they're not there, then there are organizations that specialize in consulting, and it will be people of disabilities with disabilities that know that market, that know what to ask for and what to look for. And you can hire them and they can work on those things for you. And you can find that for almost any particular dimension of people's identities. Yeah. And then speaking on dimensions of identities, it's so important. I got that phrase from Annie Jean-Baptiste. She is the product inclusion leader at Google. And she has a great book that I would recommend for everybody to read as well. It's one of the many that I have in my library as well. But I love that concept because you often hear people say, there's no way we're going to design for everybody. That's just too complicated. You're never going to make everybody happy. Okay, well then pick two things outside of the norm that you would have normally thought of. And maybe for you at your company, or you and your team, that's like, okay, we're going to think about veterans when we design. We're going to think about like people of different socioeconomic backgrounds or geographies. Or we're going to think about like, I want to go away from the typical. We always talk about race and ethnicity and gender and all of that, which are important. I say that as an Afro-Latina woman of color out here in these streets. I'm a black skinned woman out here. So like, this is like, it's important. But, there are also, thank you. There's also other dimensions of people, right? So how do we include those? I say focus on at least a couple of areas, get really good on it. Like ask about what was this process like? Like, do we have the right features? Are we missing a particular question? What does this feel like to that group of people when we prototyped and we reviewed? And even at the feedback stage, before anything goes to market, did we test this with this particular group of people and get that insight? So, and by the way, one more thing on the dimensions part. When you're thinking about these different dimensions of people, don't only think about like, did we include this? But ask yourself, how should we be including this? And what is the impact on this particular group of people if we have this product, right? I'll give you another example. So I love talking about like pension plans and retirement. This just seems so boring of a topic, but watch how it's not boring real quick. Yeah. So there was a large company that does like ride sharing, fill in the gaps in Europe, and they put together this idea that they were going to do. It was actually in the UK that they were going to give pension plans to all of their employees or all of their drivers. So they put this whole plan together. They provided the pension plans. But when they put it out, about 85 to 90% of their employees or their people could not participate in this pension plan. When you go and you find out why, it's because the majority of their drivers are Muslim. And certain groups of faith, not just Muslims, have certain considerations what happens with their funds, their money. So you can't be attached to gambling, alcohol, tobacco. You have to have it attached to something that reflects your faith value. And so in a matter of like, it was a quick turnaround. It was probably not even 2 weeks that there was like an attorney involved and all this stuff, because those drivers said, we want to participate from this benefit, but we can't. We need them to think of us, to consider us. And so in a matter of like a couple of weeks, that particular company was able to join with a group that does create those opportunities within the pension plan. And they fixed that. So now everybody can participate. But you see, that's the thought. It's like, if somebody would have thought, first of all, who are our employees that we're trying to create this thing for? What about them do we need to consider? Their culture, their religion, etc. Then you would have thought, oh, there's something called Sharia law in the Muslim groups. And we need to consider that law of how they observe their money practices, which is that law, in this pension plan. You see, so that's kind of the example of how to consider these things.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I know Dean is really set on making this a tech enablement conversation, but I'm still, wanting that to make sense for our listeners. But I love what you just said, because it goes back to the point we were making at the beginning, which is, if I were to step back and we stay with that example, I think when you're thinking about product development, you're always, again, starting with what you want to give people. What would be the advice that, if we took that, and I think you could draw this advice across anything that you're servicing people, products you're giving people, benefits you're giving your employees, that upfront piece is what we're talking about that's really important. And then you even brought in the salespeople, the marketing people to almost like test what you think you want to roll out before we roll out. But that upfront piece, what are some real strategic questions that leaders can consider when they are about to do something like that, or build a product, or whatever the case? Are there some generalized questions that you could get them to think about?
We could start with what you said, which is, you have a product idea, you're going to put it out there. Awesome. You got to start from there. But the second part is, who are we designing for? Right? Who is our market? Who are the people we're designing for? And what should we be thinking about those people? Because what could we potentially be excluding? Take those dimensions that I mentioned a second ago, literally pick like 2 and say, in whatever we're designing, whether it is an app that is about a pension plan that people can sign up for, because there's your technology piece, Dean, I'm bringing it there. Or if it's the AI that is answering questions about the pension plan, let's say the FAQ responses, and you ask this Gen AI about your pension plan and it gives you responses. Ask in that. So look at all of your questions that you just set up for that chat, and make sure that one of those questions deals with the dimension of religion, and say, okay, how would someone of different faith practices respond? Will ask questions about pension plans. Start there. So you see, like, now you start thinking about, put yourself in the user's shoes and start asking these questions so that your product has those features. Even in the design stage of coming up with something as simple as, like, what icons and illustrations will you have embedded in that technology or that app, for example, a mobile app, you should think, okay, wait, so if it's this group, most of our drivers, first ask again, who are we designing for? Our employees in that case. Let's take 2 dimensions, religion. What is most of their religions? Like, what are the religions represented in our employee group? Muslim, maybe it's Hindu, maybe it's Christian. You got different things coming up. Okay, how does a Muslim, Hindu, Christian, all these people think about pension plans? What are some things we need to think about? Then you'll learn about Sharia law. You'll learn about maybe people with their tithes and offerings in the Christian context, or you'll learn about the Catholic moral codes that involve some of how they deal with money. You'll start having these answers, and you'll prepare your product to answer those questions, to have the right illustrations in your products. You don't want to create even an illustration that could be offensive to someone who may be engaging with your product. If it is that Muslim group, again, that you're thinking about, when should we shut down certain things and not send a blast of nudges and communications through our app? Because it's Ramadan, because it's Eid, because it's like these different celebrations. So then you start breaking it down. So I hope that it, like, at a high level, start with your big idea. Identify who are you reaching out to. Pick a couple of dimensions of people's identities, right? And start then going a little bit further in the nuance of every experience you already set up, whether that's the design of the product, your communication strategy, your, like, anything that we just kind of said a second ago. But
No, that was great. And I think, again, that could be a product, that could be a service, that could be a program, that could be a facilitation course, that could be a podcast, that could be anything. And I think that's really important to sort of drive on this in this conversation. I think you just did a great job in doing that. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. No, I really like that. And I think in addition to what you were saying there, Giselle, about the couple of dimensions, and to look at the product through that lens is still also something we spoke about a little bit earlier, which is even to anticipate that there may be some things that you will have missed. And that's not that doesn't mean you're a bad product team. That means you're doing it correctly. That through the prototyping or the testing, you go, oh, crap, this doesn't work for single people.
Right.
Missed that. Okay.
You know why it's okay? Because the way that most product teams work anyway are in cycles and in sprints. You'll have a next cycle and a next sprint, and you'll be able to do a product update. And hey, guess what? This time of our product update, we have this new feature available. That's, you could turn it on or you could not, and it's available to you now. But you can keep on going back, and iterating.
Yeah, no, that's nice.
In this world, because we started this conversation talking about DEI cuts, but it doesn't sound like what we are even talking about is something that's you'd be pulling from a DEI budget. Is this normally something that would have been done by a DEI professional, or is this help make that connection for me?
So the interesting thing, it's a good question too, is that this is a new way to think about inclusion, right? So this is not really often led by the diversity office at all. This is a way, that product teams and technology teams are thinking. Even marketing teams and sales teams, they're starting to add this layer of consideration into how they do their work, and so it's embedded into how they think, how they work. Wow, now not because they're always trying to be inclusive, but more because they're like, we are missing groups of people. We want this product, this service, this thing to reach as many people as possible. And we've been missing it. How are we missing it? And now they're going back. Now, I will say that what I'm noticing as a trend is that DE&I leaders are starting to revamp or pivot how they do business because they're stretching themselves out across the business. So while they have found that they might not get all the budgets and all the things to do the DE&I, quote unquote DE&I things in their business day to day, they're seeing oh, wait, I can add what I'm doing and expand my value across the organization, because I have a perspective as a DE&I leader that marketing needs, that sales needs, that our product teams could use. And so we're starting to see a trend where DE&I experts are starting to be cross-pollinating across the business.
Yeah.
And I think what's important there is you're starting with the target audience in mind when you do that, right? It's I found when working with leaders, if you go, who are you trying to sell this to? Who are you trying to provide this service to? That takes it away from what's perceived as sort of traditional DEI and make it more about, again, in service to the client that we're trying to get on board.
Because it's about people, right?
Yeah.
There's a multinational, there's a multinational corporation in France that they do cosmetics. And, when you look at their website at the very beginning, what they're about, they say, we're not just about making products that would include all different types of skin tones and all different types of body shapes and all of these things. First of all, pause there. The fact that they would even want to do that, it makes sense business-wise, because you don't want to be a cosmetic company who only sells to one shade of people when you could be reaching so many different bodies, so many different pockets and buyers, because everybody has differences of their skin tones, right? And so there's that. But then they said, and it's also about to make sure that we don't have, bias or discrimination inside of our AI tools that we have available, or that we reach that our marketing and communications are also reflective of our communities. They don't want to create an ad or something that could be offensive. So as you see, this message is cascading across the business, where as much as you play, what's that whack-a-mole game? That's how I see this. As much as people might want to stop whatever they call DE&I from happening, you can't, because people come to the table as consumers and employees with all the differences that you got to communicate to them, you got to sell to them. You got to give them a product. You got to do all these things. And you have to consider them. So you might want to knock it here, but it's going to pop up in different places because people are people.
Yeah.
And by the way, people are people, and it's beautiful. The richness of the diversity that people bring to the table is such a beautiful thing that we should like pivot our minds and be like, wow, I'm glad that everybody's not the same. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
100%.
Thank you.
What do you say? Like, we've talked about what leaders can do when they are building products or services or solutions. And I really do love this notion of like not being dependent on, and by the way, big proponent of diversity programs, big proponent of diversity teams, hate what's happening to DEI. I just want to say that right off the bat. But, you know, we've given a lot of leaders to think about when you are building or designing or doing product development for the work, some things you need to think about up front. And I think the key word in this entire podcast is nuance. I love thinking about that. When you think about, we often talk about on this podcast, self-leadership. So let's talk about that individual contributor on that team who has a sort of different perspective or maybe having a reaction, right? I used the sweater example earlier. You know, what would you say to them in terms of their desire to build great products, their desire to make sure that the work that they're doing adds tremendous value, but don't necessarily know or can't figure out exactly how to say what's necessary to stop this, what could be a train wreck?
I'd say to that person, I feel you 100% because I have been that person where I'm like, like you can see what's happening and you want to get everybody else to see this with you. Yeah. I will say, lead with what is irrefutable, which is both the data, right, on what you're saying is what you're trying to do as a solution. Well, pose the problem. This is the problem. And not only the negative part of the problem, but this is the opportunity. So you may have a situation where you have heard client feedback or users feedback where they're saying like, where's this? Or I feel left out and this is not happening. And you could share that and then come up with your data-driven, research-informed, aligned to the business needs and vision solution, right? So you could come up with that solution, but you have to have those things that I just mentioned in place. Otherwise, you're just, throwing out some idea based on your gut feeling and what your heart is saying or something. But you can't do that. You have to lead with facts and data. Yes. And then the other thing I would say is, like, you can take a problem, again, a complaint, an escalation, an issue that happened, or you can also lead with an opportunity. The opportunity that I see, because the trends of the market are leading in this direction. Because, for example, another concrete one is like, that we're in a workforce right now where we're in the first time that all 5 generations are working at the same time, right? Yeah. And so that poses an opportunity. And you have an opportunity here to say, how do we design whatever thing that we've been working on that was traditionally used by people who were like of a certain age group that was a little bit older right now? How do we create this now for the generations that are coming that are a bit younger and the expectations that they have? Generations like Gen Z identify more than any other generation. They'll tell you, I have a neurodisability. I'm like I'm ADHD. I am dyslexic. I am autistic. Like, they more embrace that. They know people who have or themselves more than any other generation of different gender identities. They use pronouns. They know these things, and it's becoming commonplace. So they have expectations about like a lot of different things. How do you show up in your product or service to reflect that? It's opportunity. Yeah. So I would say to that person who's listening and you're like itching because you want to try to push an initiative, lead with data, research, and the facts that you'll pull in could either be pointing to the problem or it can point to the opportunity, or maybe even both in doing so.
Yeah. I love that. And I think the thing that I would also go as far as to say, when you're collecting that data, don't just think about the data you have. So we mentioned earlier going to your sales teams and finding out what are the clients saying about existing products. Like what do they feel it's missing? And if you can get your hands on that data, bring that into the conversation. And The other thing I would just offer is, the kind of leaders that we believe that are needed today, and the leaders that we hope are listening to this podcast and will be part of this community, are people that build teams that are obligated to dissent. Because you want a team around you that's going to tell you when something's going to like run into a brick wall. You don't want people on your team who won't tell you when they don't think something's good. Right. All right. Let's make a deadline. So create space for these people who are on your team, who see something or want to say something or have a different point of view, who could stop you from probably doing something that you don't want to do.
That's a good point, because Dean mentioned at the beginning about like, I'm sure that somebody was in the room and didn't say any, or no, I'm sure they were not in the room. And like how did this initiative go through? Sometimes, to your point, Allison, somebody's in the room. They just don't feel comfortable or able to say anything. Yeah.
Yeah. I think in addition to gathering the data, I think what leaders can do, because we've spoken about if you're in a product team, what can you do if you're an individual contributor? But if you're a leader in an organization and you're just on the receiving end, perhaps you're just working in another function and you're on the receiving end of a new communication tool that's being launched or a new type of, CRM. What I think all of us have experienced before is where there is some kind of an issue or an error with that tool. And it just kind of gets pushed down to the leaders to have to pick up the pieces or to have those conversations to soften or mitigate the negative effect. It's either pushed to customer service or it's pushed to the leaders. So what you were saying, Allison and Giselle, also about like gathering the data, I think it's also something about for leaders to talk about the opportunity cost, to say, yes, this thing got launched and it doesn't quite work for, single people. And now I'm going to have lots of conversations every time there's somebody in my team who this doesn't apply to, or a recruiter who's like, I now have to try and pick up the pieces every time a new applicant comes in and this thing didn't quite work for them. I'm going to have to soften it, the amount of time I'm spending on this. And what I should be talking about is not worth my while. What else could I be doing here? If we can push that back up to a product team to say, I want those changes to be implemented, rather than, executive teams saying, the leaders they'll cover that piece.
And I would also say, like, open up your feedback sessions to your clients to give you feedback. Like I've often worked in places where people have like a top client group and they gather them together and they share, hey, we're thinking about launching this thing. Here's the experience. You're the first one to see it. Tell us what you think. Like, poke holes in this. And you often do hear certain things where they're like, we're not feeling that. That's not the right approach. And so that's good. Like, from every level. Also, use your ERGs in your company, your employee resource groups, who are the specialists in those lived experiences of people with disabilities or people of certain races and ethnicities, and share with them and find creative ways to reward people, because you don't want to also add to someone's plate a whole bunch of work when they're just there to have community and connection. But you would be surprised that a lot of people feel honored that because we do this, I've done this as well, share a product feature with them to get their input and to get their reaction. And they've told us hey, you're missing something here. Please try to, but they also feel so privileged to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So we've talked about 3 things on this call. We talked about DEI, and whether it's going the way or not, it doesn't matter. Leaders have an obligation to build teams with that feel inclusive, that have different voices and different perspectives. And we've also talked about how that same leader is responsible for thinking about the products and the services and the programs that they're building. We talked very specifically, which I loved, about those things that you can consider when you're building those products, services, and programs. So you can not just think about the problem that you are solving, but who that target audience is and what is it about them that is going to engage them in this product, and what do you need to know about who they are? And then we talked about, which I was very happy to get to, which is the individual on the team who needs to be, that voice in the room, or the person that says, let's consider data when we are designing our products and our programs and our services. Giselle, from your opinion, what else did you not say that you think would be really important for our listeners to know about the space?
I'd say, again, this is about people, and people aren't going away. No one is going away. Like the aspects of what make all of us whoever we are, it will continue to be.
We might have a lot more gray hair, but we're not going away.
You can die that because it's okay. So, and so I'd say just like realize that. Everyone is not you. Everyone is not a particular persona that we want to put in our minds, and we kind of make it down to that in business. I think that's shifting as well. I'm challenging that notion that we have personas and people's because even behind those personas are nuance, to your point, Allison. I love that word. And so how do we consider that? So I just want to say that, look, to everyone listening, when I know we are in a climate right now, and it seems like it continues to just exasperate. Like it's this thing about when you talk about certain things about people, it becomes so divisive and it becomes so ugly, and we lose sight of we're all just people trying to live our best life out here. Everybody, whether you even if you think about it, I would say I have had the best conversations with people who are completely different from me, who think in a completely different way than what I think. But in sitting and chatting with them, and maybe even sharing a meal and getting to know these people a little bit better, and them getting to know me, we always find a common place. And I think at the core, people are good. I think that people care about each other, but we let ourselves get distracted and inundated with a whole bunch of noise. And so I'd say that, when we keep talking about DEI in the future, simplify what we're talking about. Remember, we're just talking about people. And not so much of the rhetoric and the politicized.
Yeah.
I really think that is a tweet. That is a tweet. Hopefully you tweeted that.
That's a long tweet. Listen, I don't know how many.
No, just the last few lines is just such a tweet, which is basically, DEI is all just about people, and that's really at the crux of it, right? And if you start there, and I think that's the most important part. Dean, is there anything else that you would want to close us out on?
Thanks, Allison. Well, I just want to say thanks so much to you, Giselle. I really, I just love hearing you speak, your concrete examples, and obviously your passion for this and your very solid expertise here. So much of what you've also shared, and even in that last piece as well about, you saying you've learned so much from people is even those, especially those who are so different from you, makes me really happy. That's why you are here on this podcast. That's why you really sort of belong here. But, the Leadership Rewired podcast is around building this community of resilient, growth-minded individuals. And in particular, this piece of being growth-minded or having a growth mindset is one of being able to tolerate difference, being able to be comfortable in a space of multiple points of view, being able to be somebody who can say, hey, I hadn't thought about that in terms of how we're developing our product. Or I realized we had missed out on talking to our Latino community. Okay, my bad. What can I do differently? Oh, I realized we had missed out on LGBT. Okay, what else can I do here? And not to be undone by that.
Yes.
And to say, that's my job as a leader. And that's how I'm rewiring my leadership, in that I'm being pushed as well to see things that maybe I have a blind spot for now, but that's okay. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm growing. So I hope, thank you so much for what you've shared. Thank you, Allison. As always, just so lovely to be with you. I think everybody could have something that we come away with from this podcast together and saying, I can think about something differently. I can think about and appreciate my people differently. I can think differently in terms of how I articulate choices that we would make about the technology we're using, aligning it to business goals in a different way. I think there's just like a plethora of good stuff that's come from this. So
I'm glad to hear it.
Thank you so much.
I think I would just summarize that also to just say we all play a part. We play a part in creating inclusive spaces and products and services. And I love what you said, Dean. And Giselle, I have enjoyed this conversation as well. And seeing it on paper is not nearly as magical and as thoughtful as I thought it was going to be. This has been really a great conversation. I've been fully engaged. How do people connect with you? How do people find you? What are the ways in which people can connect and learn more about you and the services that you provide?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You could reach out to me as Giselle Mota on there. We can connect, and all my things are on there. Also, the website that Dean shared earlier, versd.io. And if you have a product or service or something that you're working on and you want this perspective, you don't even know where to start, but you want to start small, or you want to go full-fledged and build this in your organization, I'll let you girl. I am here to assist. I am absolutely here to assist, and I love it.
And you should just know that officially puts you in the partner space for this podcast, and we will definitely make sure that you are well positioned and that people know about all the great work that you're doing and how to get in touch with you. So as always, we so appreciate you guys listening in. We love your feedback. Please subscribe to the Leadership Rewired podcast. We are trucking along and moving in the right direction, and we love the feedback we've gotten so far, but we want more. So, and tell us what you want to hear, and tell us what you think about this episode. I'm excited about the content we discussed here. So look forward to talking to you guys soon. Thank you for all your time.
Thanks, Giselle. Thanks, Allison. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Giselle. Dean.